Chapter 6. By the time they were ready for break for the weekend on Friday afternoon, Anthony had firmly entrenched himself into Bri's life. He wandered into the office where she was talking on the phone before leaving, and stood leaning against the wall, watching her. She had finished up all the painting, and she was now working on getting stationery printed for the hotel. She spent a lot of time on the laptop on her desk in the small office, deciding on linens and ordering things for each specific room. She seemed so excited all the time. "I've got you down for the second weekend in April, Friday through Sunday." "Yes, sir. I'll make sure your confirmations go to your mobile phone. I'm excited to meet you and your wife." "Thank you." She put the phone on its cradle and smiled at him. "You finished?" "For today. I'm going to need help getting bathtubs, toilets, and sinks for the bathrooms up the stairs on Tuesday. I'll call my brother. Are you okay with doing it at 6:30? He won't mind?" Anthony had never had a brother, and watching her with her cousin fascinated him. His dad had been an orphan, and his mom had been an only child. He'd seen his grandmother regularly, but she and his father were the sum total of his family. He was more than a little intrigued by Bri's huge family. "Nah. I'll make him breakfast and send him home a big pot of my stew, which he claims is nectar of the gods. He'll do the work, and we'll both be happy. You'll like Jack. He's a good guy." She started to tell him he'd offered to distract Jennifer for a while, but she bit her lip. If he didn't already realize their relationship was on the tongue of every Roberts in town, she wasn't going to be the one to clue him in. "So what are your plans for tonight?" "I think we should do something together." She shrugged helplessly. "We could go to a movie. Or go dancing. There's a little bar on the edge of town that does a live country band on Friday and Saturday nights. It's a local band, and they're really not ready for a record deal, but they're a lot of fun to dance to. Or we could go to dinner somewhere. Go hang out in the hot springs." She sighed. "Or I could do what I should do and go grocery shopping for the things that I can prep for the party I'm catering next weekend and get started. How about this? I'll go home and shower and get into something a little cleaner, and come back for you. We'll go get the groceries you need together, and you can turn me into your kitchen lackey." What's a caterer without a kitchen lackey? It wouldn't be his first choice of ways to spend a Friday night, but as long as he got to spend it with her, he wouldn't complain too much. She looked at him for a moment, as if trying to see into his mind. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Of course I'm going to need payment for said services." She groaned. "I already have too many expenses for the catering job. I'm paying you with another job. You're fixing the sidewalk, remember? That's not the kind of payment I mean." He walked toward her, taking her hand and pulling her out from behind the desk. "I was thinking a kiss or two, and a home-cooked meal. My grandmother died when I was 15. I haven't had a lot of home-cooked meals since then. My dad figured eating out was easier than cooking, so we ate out a whole lot." Bri frowned. "Are you trying to make me feel sorry for you, so I'll cook for you more than I already do? Is it working? Breakfasts would be really nice." She laughed, wrapping her arms around him and hugging him tightly. "You absolutely destroy my schedule, but you're cute, so I think I'll keep you." "Good. Let's talk wedding dates." She pushed away from him, shaking her head. The man was a mess and a half. "Go shower and meet me back here in 45 minutes. I'll throw something together for supper, and we'll go shop before we eat." "It's only 3, you want to eat before 4? "Of course not. I'll get everything prepped and then cook it after we shop." "You have any requests?" She was almost afraid to ask, because she knew he would eat anything she made. The man wasn't finicky about his food at all. As long as she made it, he'd eat it. "You said something about stew that you're making for your brother. Can you make stew for me?" Sure. With homemade bread? She sighed. You always have to make it harder, don't you? I have some dough that I froze into loaves in the freezer. I'll get some out now, and hopefully it will be thawed enough for me to make it for supper. He leaned down and kissed her softly. As long as you cook for me every day, I'm willing to give up my freedom and marry you. I will pledge undying devotion. You know, as flattering as that proposal was, I think I'd rather my future husband loved me for me and not for my cooking. Are you saying I don't love you? I'm not even going there, Bri said, shaking her head. You go shower, and I'll get started on the stew. By the time he came back, she had the stew prepared and partially cooked. She picked up the pot from the stove and poured it into her crock-pot while he watched. It'll be ready when we get back. And if it needs to cook a little longer, I'll just pour it back into the big pot. Just so I get fed. I don't much care what goes into it. She sighed. You're a handful, Anthony Black. Are you this difficult on all your jobs? Nope. Usually I just do my work and leave, barely talking at all. I only talk to the special people I work for. Trying to butter me up? Well, I do want some butter on that homemade bread you're making me. You're a pain in my butt sometimes. You know that? Anthony grinned. That's what you love best about me, right? I wouldn't say that. Bri followed him outside and stood next to his truck. Am I driving? He asked. He'd expected her to drive. I'd prefer if you did. I don't like to drive with snow on the ground. You live in the mountains of Colorado, and you don't like to drive with snow on the ground? Everyone has little eccentricities. She grinned at the surprised look on his face. She knew she was odd, but she'd slid on some black ice once and almost gone over a guardrail and off the road. Somehow she felt safer if she was the passenger. He unlocked the truck and got in. Mine's already warm too. That'll help a little. I appreciate you grocery shopping with me. I wanted to spend the time together, but I really do need to get to work on the party. I've been so busy with the band bee that I haven't started prepping at all. Usually, I'd have it mostly done by now. Jennifer invited me to the party. She told me it would be the premier event in town for the entire year, and I'd be missing out if I didn't come. Anthony shook his head. He'd met women like Jennifer before, and he had no desire to get to know her any better. He was familiar enough with her type. Bri rolled her eyes, trying to make light of it. She knew what the other girl was up to. Her prom date had left with Jennifer after all. I suppose she offered to be your date since I need to work at the party, and you shouldn't be left all alone with nothing to do? She did. He glanced over at her as he was stopped at a traffic light. I told her I was going to help you in the kitchen. She laughed. You're helping me in the kitchen? I figured I could put on a suit and carry trays around if you need me to. You'd do that for me? She was shocked that he'd pass up the chance to go to the party instead of working at it. Only if you promise to save one dance for me. Jennifer would hate it if the help danced at her parents' anniversary party, so I'm all for it. Let's do it. She tried to be a good person, but she was just vindictive enough to love the idea. Thanks for being willing to help out. I would do anything for my future wife. I've never agreed to marry you. She shook her head. He was getting more persistent every day. I'm going to figure out the right way to propose by watching those musicals. I have a list, and I'm renting them all online and watching them when we're not together. He didn't add that he was watching them while soaking in baths filled with Epsom salt to help his sore body. The morning runs were really getting to him. He was going to have to buy a pass to go and soak in the hot springs that weekend. He was getting that sore, and he'd heard about the healing powers of the hot springs. Whether he believed in those healing powers was another story entirely. She just grinned at him, having no idea what to say. He'd been telling her they'd marry since she'd first cooked for him. She was a good cook, and she didn't dispute that. Having a man who loved her for more than her homemade bread would be nice though. Shopping with him was an experience. He had to push the cart, and she put in the things she'd need that didn't have to be purchased fresh. Jennifer had been right about her dad's taste in food. It was absolutely ridiculous. There was work involved in all the things she was making, but most could be made by the average teenager who knew how to preheat an oven and set a timer. Anthony had her pick up several things that she wouldn't normally buy because he wanted her to make them for him. "I'm supposed to be shopping for the party, not for you," she said after the fifth thing, getting exasperated. "Yeah, but I'm helping at the party to pay for all the extra food I eat." Bri shook her head. "You're so good to me." In the frozen foods aisle, and she had no idea what had made them end up there, they ran into her cousin Molly. "Oh, this must be the new contractor in town. Mom told me you had a honey." Bri froze, feeling more than a little mortified. "Molly, this is Anthony." "Anthony, my cousin Molly." "Oh, you must be Becca's sister." Anthony shook her hand, noting the lopsided smile. He loved that all the family he'd met so far had that same smile. It made them stick out from the other new people in town. "Nope. I'm Steve's kid. Becca is Bob's youngest." Molly grinned at him, obviously thrilled to get to meet the man her cousin was seeing. "Wait, how many cousins are there?" To him, a man with no cousins, there seemed to be hundreds. Molly shook her head at Bri. "You haven't shown him the family tree yet? Mom has you guys married and pregnant already. Better get on the ball." To Anthony, she said, "Once upon a time, there were 3 brothers. Each brother had children. Ralph became a banker and had 3 feisty brats. Steve became a lawyer and had 3 wonderful children. Bob became a real estate agent, and he and his wife had 4 rotten runts." Bri rolled her eyes. "Only Steve's kids are worth anything, of course." Anthony looked back and forth between the cousins. "So there are 10 of you running around?" Bri nodded. "Becca and I are the babies. She's a week older than me." Molly eyed Anthony, obviously curious about the man her cousin was seeing. "Are you scared yet?" He shook his head. "I have no family other than my dad. I want to have siblings and 7 cousins." Bri just laughed. "That's because you haven't seen us all together yet." She raised her hand to wave at Molly. "I need to get home and start prepping for the party." She knew she didn't have to say what party, because not only were they a tight-knit family, but they lived in a small town. There was no way to hide anything from anyone else, and she'd stopped trying years ago. Molly rolled her eyes. "That'll be fun. Yippee-skippy." She started wandering off down the aisle, and after a moment, Anthony followed her. "She's nice," Anthony told her. Bri shrugged. "She's a cousin. I have them coming out my ears, so I don't rate them often. If I didn't want to marry you for your cooking, I'd want to marry you for your family. You all seem to really get along." "We do. We pick on each other and fight like cats and dogs, but there'd better not be anyone outside the family picking on one of us. We close ranks fast." She looked down at her list and then at the items in the shopping cart, trying to figure out what she was missing. "Oh, we need milk. I mixed up the dough for chocolate chip cookies while you were gone, and I'm going to bake them tonight. My way of thanking you for helping me shop and prep stuff. Can I just put you in my pocket and keep you there? Forever? Stuffing random women in your pockets is frowned upon. I think it would be best if you didn't do that." She pulled the groceries from the cart and put them on the conveyor belt, smiling at the woman checking them out. "Hey, Mary Jo. How's the new grandbaby?" The woman's whole face lit up at the question. "He's the most beautiful thing this side of the Rockies." She pulled a framed picture from down next to her cash register and handed it to Bri. "See? Oh, he's gorgeous. I wish they lived a little closer. Mary Jo nodded. You and me both. Denver's not so far as the crow flies, but over those mountains in the winter gets scary. Randy's going to drive me over next week. I need to snuggle that boy and pinch his little cheeks. Bri laughed as she paid. I know you're looking forward to that. You bet I am. Mary Jo leaned forward over the expansive counter separating them. Your new man is pretty sexy. Tell Jennifer to keep her hands off for a change. I will. See you soon. Bri headed toward the door, leaving Anthony staring at the woman dumbfounded. After a moment, he hurried to catch up. She seemed to know about us. Oh, everyone in town's been talking about us since Monday evening. Welcome to Silver Springs. She went through the automatic door as it opened, trying not to laugh. She was sure a city boy like him was having trouble keeping up with the small-town gossip. He'd have to get used to it though. Chapter 7. Anthony carried the groceries in while Bri put everything away. She tasted the stew and decided it was cooking fast enough in the crock pot, so she let it be and started spooning the cookies onto a cookie sheet. Becca walked in and plopped down into a chair. What a day. She leaned down and massaged her calf muscles. I know we need the little bit extra that I get from working 2 shifts waiting tables every week, but I can't wait to quit. Bri smiled at her cousin. 7 weeks. After they'd graduated in December, they'd decided that Becca could do her share of the work in less hours than Bri, at least until they opened. So Becca worked 2 late afternoon into early evening shifts every week at a local restaurant. I'm counting the hours. Anthony walked in and plopped one last grocery bag onto the table. That's all of them. Thanks. Bri was always a little startled when she realized just how easily Anthony fit into her life. You need an Epsom salt bath, he suggested to Becca. It helps achy muscles. Becca nodded. Better yet, after supper, I'm going to grab my bathing suit and walk over to the hotel. The hot springs are calling me. Not a bad idea. Anthony's going to help me with some of the food prep for the party tonight. You've done your share for the day, so you go rest there. I'll help on Sunday. I work tomorrow. Becca leaned back in her chair. Supper smells good. It does, doesn't it? Anthony sniffed deeply. She's making fresh bread. You're getting spoiled. She never makes fresh bread for me. I'm a better kisser than you are, he responded. Becca burst out laughing. I don't know about that, but since I never plan to kiss my cousin the way you do, I think I'll just let you win this argument. You will? He grinned happily. I didn't think any of the Roberts would ever let me win an argument. I feel like I've just won a gold medal in the Olympics. Or better yet, a Nobel Prize. He cleared his throat. I'd like to thank the Academy. Becca shook her head at him. You have to marry Bri. You feel like a brother or a cousin to me already. Bri turned and looked at her cousin after sliding the bread into the oven. I can't believe you just said that. Oh, please. You know as well as anyone that I'll say anything I want to say whenever I want to say it. Becca shrugged at Anthony. At least you know one of the family likes you. We ran into Molly at the grocery store, Bri told her. She went into how superior Uncle Steve's kids are. Again. Of course she did. She's got to feel superior about something. She's one of us after all. Anthony looked at Becca. What do you feel superior about? My ability to speak my mind and stand my ground verbally with every member of our family, Becca answered quickly. Okay, Anthony said, thinking about her answer. Bri, what do you feel superior about? My cooking. It may not be quite as good as my mom's, but it's good enough that people ask me to cater, so I can live with that. You'll be making meals when the band bee is open? He asked. He hadn't really thought about the big house becoming a business. He liked it the way it was. Bri nodded. I'll make breakfast every morning, and that'll be included in the price of the room. We'll probably let locals come for breakfast if they want, but that won't happen until after we're open for a month or two and get used to the routine. I'll make boxed lunches for anyone who wants one. We're such a touristy place because of our beautiful mountains. I know the guests will want to be able to take a lunch with them, rather than having to come all the way back to town to eat. No suppers? I'll cook for Becca and me like I always do. And me? He asked, acting offended that she wasn't including him. She laughed. If you're still hanging around here after we're open, I'll make you supper, I guess. She slid the first batch of cookies onto wire racks to cool and plopped more dough onto the cookie sheet. I don't suppose I could talk you into a cookie before supper? I'm wasting away to nothing over here. Becca sat back and watched the banter between the two. She already thought of Anthony as one of the family, but she didn't say that. She loved to watch her cousin and the man she was sure would someday be her cousin-in-law. Was that even a word? Is cousin-in-law a word? Bri turned and glared at Becca. Between Anthony and her cousin, she wasn't sure which one brought up marriage more often. The chime they'd had installed on the front door rang, and a voice called loudly, "Where are you hiding?" Bri groaned. "In the kitchen, Mom." Her parents had both stayed away a lot longer than she'd expected, so she shouldn't be surprised. "I finished the wicked quilt, and I thought you'd like to see it," Mom said, stepping into the kitchen with her arms full. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." She elbowed Dad. "Look, Ralph. Bri and Becca have company." Bri rolled her eyes. "Mom, Dad, this is Anthony Black. He's the new contractor in town. He's helping me prep food for the party, so I'm fixing him dinner." Anthony jumped to his feet, suddenly feeling nervous. He hadn't expected to meet her parents. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Roberts." Ralph stepped forward and shook his hand. "Good to meet you too, son." "Can I call you son?" Anthony looked at Bri over his shoulder before responding. She looked disgusted with all of them. "I'd like nothing more. I'm making stew. There's enough for 5 if you guys are hungry." "No, your dad's taking me out tonight." "Becca, you should come with us. I feel like we never get to spend time together now that you girls are grown and you're not coming over for sleepovers every weekend." Mom held up the quilt and Bri grinned. "It's perfect. Who would have thought a woman who loves to meddle so conspicuously into her children's lives could make something so beautiful?" Bri walked over and touched it with one finger. "I love it. The furniture for the bedrooms will be here Monday, and I can't wait to get the room completely put together. I put up curtains this week too. Why don't I come over Tuesday to help? I'd love to be part of it." Mom nudged Becca. "Are you coming to dinner with us or not?" Becca groaned. "Not. I worked at the restaurant today, and my legs are killing me. I'm going to let Bri feed me, then take myself over to the hotel to soak in the hot springs." Dad was still sizing up Anthony. "How do you like Silver Springs?" Anthony shrugged. "It's definitely a small town. I've never lived anywhere where everyone knew my business, quite like here." "Where are you from?" Dad asked. "Denver." Anthony wanted to sit back down, because his legs were killing him after all the running he'd been doing, but he didn't dare. He wanted to make a good impression on his future father-in-law. And no matter what Bri thought, she was going to marry him. "What brings you to Silver Springs from Denver?" "I got tired of the fast-paced city life. I've worked for my dad my entire life, and I got tired of being called Junior. I wanted to live somewhere I could establish my own identity, and not just be the boss's kid." Dad grinned. Well, I think that's a fine reason for moving here, Junior. Now tell me about your intentions toward my daughter. Bri shook her head and went back to her baking, while Anthony sputtered looking for an answer. I plan to marry her just as soon as I can convince her it's a good idea. She thinks that I'm going to run off with Jennifer the first chance I get, but that girl isn't worth running off with. Anthony carefully didn't look at Bri, knowing she wouldn't like him having this conversation with her dad. You don't mind if I run a background check on you, do you, Junior? Not at all, sir. I have nothing to hide. Anthony couldn't believe the man was so bold in asking, but he knew if it was his daughter, he'd want to do the same thing. He probably wouldn't though. Good answer. You have my permission to ask her to marry you. I know you were going to come to me and beg for permission, and I should make you sit there and ask me over and over, and maybe force you to undergo different forms of torture only known in spy novels, but instead, I'm going to give you permission now. Please, take her off my hands. Bri gasped. I'm not on your hands, Dad. I've been on my own for 2 years now. Go away. Dad sighed. You might want to think about finding someone who is more polite to the man who fathered her, though. I'm not sure if she's good enough for you. Anthony grinned. I'll keep her. I think she's just right for me. Suit yourself. Dad looked at Mom. You ready? I trust him with the girls. Mom frowned. That was awfully fast, Ralph. What if he's just a fast-talking city boy who knows how to make fathers trust him? I'd know. Go put the quilt in the guest parlor. You can come back on Tuesday. What time Tuesday? Mom asked Bri. I'll be ready to work at 6:30 like always. Do you want to come before or after lunch? I'll come for lunch, and we'll work after. How would that be? Bri nodded. Jack is coming Tuesday to help carry stuff upstairs too. He just doesn't know it yet. Mom looked at Anthony. It was nice meeting you. I'm reserving judgment until I get to know you better. Sounds very wise to me, Anthony replied, having no idea what else to say to her. He wanted her to love him immediately, but he couldn't fault her for not. When will I get to meet your mother? She asked him. My mom died of breast cancer when I was 2. My dad never remarried. Mom's face softened and she hugged Anthony. You need to marry Bri so I can be your mother then. Bri shook her head. Really, Mom? You caved fast. The boy needs a mama. You marry him, Bri. Mom waved as she took Dad's arm to pull him away. Nice meeting you, Anthony. If you ever need a good home-cooked meal, you come see me. Thank you, Mrs. Roberts. Just call me Mom. As soon as her mother was out of the room, Bri groaned. Now she's never going to shut up about me marrying you. What were you thinking? Anthony threw his hands up in the air. He wasn't quite sure what had just happened, but he liked her parents. He liked them a lot. I think I have a new mom. Becca's soft laughter erupted into loud raucous guffaws at that point. Bri, he got Robertsed. Bri sighed. I guess he did. Welcome to the family, Anthony. I guess I have a new brother. Anthony caught Bri by the hips and pulled her to him, kissing her soundly, much to the amusement of Becca. I have no brotherly feelings toward you at all, Bri. She rested her forehead against his shoulder. I don't feel exactly sisterly toward you, but I think my mom may have just adopted you. He chuckled softly. She adopted me as a future son-in-law, not as a son. I'm not so sure about that. I am. He buried his face in her hair. That bread is starting to smell amazing. She sighed and pulled away from him. Your stomach, it's never going to be satisfied, is it? She poked him in the belly. Sure it will. You satisfied it at lunchtime, and it'll be satisfied again as soon as we eat. She shook her head. If she really did marry him, feeding him would be a full-time job. For the first time, she let her mind think about what marriage to him would be like. He hadn't run off to Jennifer yet, and she'd tried. Maybe he was going to stay. Just maybe, she'd get to keep him forever. She pulled the bread out of the oven and served the stew, before taking the next batch of cookies from the oven and dropping 12 more. He was worth baking a few cookies for. Why, he might be worth everything. Her eyes met Becca's, and she knew immediately what her cousin was thinking. Becca nodded slightly. She approved. Taking her seat beside Anthony, she brushed her fingers along his arm. It was a light touch, but it was the first time she'd reached out to him that way. He'd always initiated. He looked at her and smiled, communicating without words that he knew what it had taken for her to reach out to him. He wasn't going anywhere. He'd found the girl he wanted to spend the rest of his life with, and he was going to stay. Forever. Becca watched the two of them with longing in her eyes. The relationship may be new, but it was obviously forever. She wanted what Bri had. Not with Anthony, of course, but with someone. Someday. Chapter 8. After her run Saturday morning, Bri stopped in at Books and Beans as usual. She was just taking her first sip of coffee when she heard a voice from behind her. "I need a cup of whatever magic you have brewing." Bri turned to see Jack coming in. He often stopped by on his way home from work as a paramedic. He was on the overnight shift, and he tried to time his visits with Bri's. Despite their teasing, the three siblings were very close, and they cared for each other deeply. "Hey, Jack." "Hi, you. I heard that Mom has decided to adopt your guy. Why don't I get to meet him?" "You sleep all day. Maybe if you weren't such a wastrel." Emma laughed. "I haven't met him yet, and I'm up early." Bri rolled her eyes. "Jack, why don't you come meet him on Tuesday morning? He needs help carrying toilets, sinks, and bathtubs up the stairs." "Oh, that sounds like fun." Jack rolled his eyes. "I'll be there." 6:30? "Yeah, if you would. I'll make you a big pot of your favorite stew to take with you, and I'll make you your favorite breakfast as payment." Jack grinned. "You know how I like to be paid." "I'll be there." "I will too," Emma said, glaring at her sister. "I haven't gotten to meet him yet. He's going to come over this evening, and we're going to prep more food for the Olsen's anniversary party. You can come help tonight if you want. Don't think I won't show up. I'm not going to be the last person in all of Silver Springs to meet him. He's met Becca, Mom and Dad, and now he's meeting Jack. What about me? I'm your favorite sister." "He met Molly last night too," Bri said, taking a sip of her coffee, knowing her sister would hate that. "Molly? How did he meet Molly?" "We ran into her in the frozen foods section of the grocery store last night." Bri shrugged. "Of course you did. We need to do a big family gathering, so everyone can meet him." "Nope. It's easier a few at a time. I'm not putting that together. Not with that party coming up next week, and our opening less than 2 months away. Do you have any idea how long I've dreamed of opening this place with Becca? My whole life, that's how long." "I know. You used to talk about it constantly. I think even Grandma got annoyed with you too after a while. Instead of having your dolls get married and have babies, they were opening a bed and breakfast. It was positively nauseating." Emma handed a bag to Bri. "Fine. I'll come by tonight to meet him." "What are we making tonight?" "Sausage rolls." "Are you kidding? Those things are so easy, even Jennifer could make them." "Why is she paying you?" Bri shrugged. "We all know how much Jennifer likes to work." Jack shook his head. "Is she staying out of your way with Anthony?" His voice was serious for the first time since he'd walked in the door. Nope. Not at all. Anthony is ignoring her though. She asked him to be her date to her parents' party, but he told her he was helping me in the kitchen, which I hadn't even asked him to do. Wow. So he's really going to help? Or he lied to her? Bri smiled. He's really going to help. He's a good man. And I love him. So when's the wedding? She stuck her tongue out at her brother, refusing to answer. She was tired of that question already. She'd known Anthony for less than a week. If he was still by her side in another week or two, maybe she could start contemplating. I'll walk you home, Jack said, nodding to Emma. Thanks for the coffee, sis. I'll be there at 6 for supper, Bri. Emma called after them. Thank you. Bri called back. As they walked, Jack asked her about Anthony. I'm not teasing anymore. I really want to know what he's like. I know he's a contractor. He is. He grew up in Denver and has always worked for his dad. His mom died of breast cancer when he was 2. He moved here because he needed a new start. He wanted to be able to work for himself in a place where everyone wouldn't call him Junior. Jack listened to her, watching her face as she talked about him. You love him, don't you? Bri bit her lip, not sure that she should tell her brother before she told Anthony, but she finally nodded. I do. I know it's crazy, because I've known him less than a week, but he's exactly what I've been looking for my entire life. It's not crazy. I think that's how love is supposed to be. Some people say it's the slow burn, but I think if you've known someone for years and you don't love them, something major has to happen to make it start. I don't know. I'm happy for you, though. I just hope he doesn't run off. Jennifer still scares me. Bri hated to admit it, especially to Jack, who would someday use the information to tease her mercilessly, but she really did need a man's perspective on the situation. Jennifer isn't the kind of girl a man wants to keep forever. She's someone you play with for a little while. You're the kind of girl a man marries. I'm afraid he wants to marry me because of my cooking. Jack threw back his head and laughed. If he didn't want you to cook for him every day for the rest of his life, he'd be insane. I love your cooking, and I'm your brother. She rolled her eyes. You're just trying to get me to make you breakfast today instead of Tuesday. He sighed. You caught me. I'll make you a deal. I'll skip the stew if you'll make breakfast today and Tuesday. Of course. He was doing her a huge favor, but even if he wasn't, she'd feed him. She had enough of her mother in her that she believed she should cook for anyone who was hungry. They had reached the band B, and he held the screen door for her. The usual? Yes, please. He went into the kitchen and washed his hands, sitting at the table to watch her cook. Bri was so much like their mom it startled him at times. Emma was a lot like her too, of course, but she didn't feed everyone she came across. Bri seemed to think it was her duty to feed people. The door chimed as soon as she took the bacon from the fridge. We're in the kitchen, she called. Someday you're going to learn to lock your doors, Jack told her. I'm about to open a business. Now is not the time to start locking. She pulled out the eggs and milk, along with the ingredients for pancakes. Her brother liked to have a huge breakfast, and she knew just how he liked everything. Good morning, Anthony said from the doorway, looking back and forth between her and Jack. Am I interrupting something? Jack stood. You're interrupting a sweet woman fixing breakfast for her big brother. His grin told Anthony everything he needed to know. He was definitely a member of the Roberts clan. Their smiles were like no others. Breakfast sounds good. Wanna feed me too? Bri sighed. Of course. Anthony had daydreamed on the ride over about walking into the house, taking Bri into his arms, and kissing her madly. He couldn't do that with her brother sitting right there, so he took a seat instead. What time do you want to start working? After I clean up the breakfast dishes, she said. You two talk. She completely spaced out as she worked. She could hear the men talking about something behind her, but she had no idea what it was. She mixed the batter for the pancakes and started the bacon frying. 20 minutes later, she had 2 huge breakfasts on the table and a couple of pancakes for herself. Where's your bacon? Jack asked. She shrugged. I only had 6 pieces left. Jack took 1 piece of bacon and laid it on her plate. I know bacon is your favorite meat. I'm not going to let you go without. Bri laughed. I've gone without bacon before. It won't kill me. I promise. Well, you shouldn't have to sacrifice for us. I don't like you, Anthony said to Jack as he put a slice of his bacon on Bri's plate. Everyone likes me, Jack responded. I'm sure you're mistaken about how you feel. Bri chuckled. He's right. Everyone does like him. It's disgusting sometimes. Well, if he hadn't given you his bacon, then I wouldn't have had to give you a slice to keep from looking like a jerk. Now I'm missing that bacon already. Anthony took a sip of his coffee. You can have it back. Bri held it up for him. No, I can't. Not now that I know it's your favorite. I have to let you have it. He shook his head at Jack. You've ruined my entire day. Jack looked at Anthony and finally nodded. I agree with Mom. You need to be a part of our family. You're going to make a great brother. Has Bri asked you to help me on Tuesday morning yet? Anthony asked, not sure how to respond to the brother comment. She has. That's how I conned her into making me breakfast. You had to con her into making you breakfast? She cooks for me all the time without conning. I think she likes me better than you. Anthony winked at Bri, who blushed. Behave yourself, Anthony. I'll start asking for favors in return before you know it. Anthony took a bite of bacon and smiled. Trust me, lady. For cooking like this, I'd go out there and climb a mountain without ropes. I'd take off my shirt and lay it over a mud puddle for you too. Bri just rolled her eyes and kept on eating. I don't think I realized just how alike you two were before I saw you together. Jack looked at the other man, studying him for a moment. I'll take that as a compliment. He wiped off his mouth and stood. Breakfast was delicious as always. I will be here bright and early Tuesday morning. He held his hand out to Anthony. It's good to meet you. Welcome to the family. Bri groaned. You and Mom can't run around adopting every stray man you meet. We don't and never have. Jack left, his words still echoing in the kitchen. Exactly how many stray men have your mother and brother adopted? Anthony asked after they heard the chime that meant Jack had left the house. Just you. She knew it was strange, but she felt it too. He not only made her heart beat faster, but he fit with the family. He belonged there in Silver Springs with her. Is your dad going to be sad if you don't move back to Denver? He shook his head. I think he's a little relieved to be rid of me. Really? She asked skeptically. Who would be happy to no longer have their son around? He shrugged. Dad and I get along well, but he never seemed to be able to realize I was an adult. He was still trying to parent me. I don't really need someone to take care of me anymore. In what way? He was always commenting on how I did a job. If I did anything even a little bit differently than how he would do it, he had a problem with it. My way could be faster and more efficient and safer, and he'd still tell me I was doing it wrong. He never meant to upset me or make me mad, he just couldn't shut off being a dad and let me be a coworker. It was nuts. I can see why you needed to leave. I really did need to be my own man, and not just my father's son. And I think I was pulled here to get to you. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing it softly. Do you believe in fate? Not particularly. I think people make their own fate. I think people carve their own paths. Every decision we make is ours and affects our future. She shrugged. I think fate is kind of a cop-out for most people. I think fate brought me to you. I think you're the woman I'm meant to spend my life with. My dad firmly believes, and always taught me, that there's one perfect person in this world for everyone, and if you're lucky enough to find that person, you hold on with everything you've got for the rest of your life. She looked down at her hands for a moment. I hope you still feel that way in a week or so. You're still worried about Jennifer, aren't you? Why can't you get it through your head that I'm not even attracted to her? You're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. I'm not going to run off for a fling with her. She sighed. I've never seen a man who could choose me over her. Never. I think that's because you've been around boys your whole life. You've never really been around a man. Real men are loyal. He stood, rubbing the back of his neck. Do you want me to help you with the dishes? She shook her head. No, I'm faster alone. I have a system. He nodded. I'm going to go for a quick walk then. I need to think. I'll be back in 30 minutes to help you with the food prep. Thanks. She watched him go, feeling awful. Why couldn't she just trust that he wasn't like the others? Her brother couldn't be the only man in the world who could hold out against Jennifer. As Anthony walked, he thought. He wouldn't mention marriage again until another week or two had passed, but he wasn't going to stay silent for long. He loved that sweet woman, and not just her cooking. Whether she believed it or not, he was sure they were fated to be together. No other woman had ever made him feel protective and passionate all at once. No, he was keeping her, and he didn't care how much she complained about it. She was his, and that's all there was to it. Her father and brother both approved of him already, and her mother had adopted him. She was his. She just didn't know it yet. Chapter 9. When Bri woke on Sunday morning, she felt a little flutter of excitement, her first thoughts on Anthony. It was new for her to think of a man even before she thought of her obligations for the day and her business. Looking out the window, she frowned. She liked to run 7 days a week, and she could run in rain, and she ran in snow often, but they'd gotten at least 6 inches overnight. She couldn't run through that. She changed into shorts and a tank top and headed down to the basement. The treadmill would have to be good enough. She put a foot on each side of the belt and started it at an easy jog and slowly bumped it higher and higher. As she ran, she listened to her show tunes, losing herself in the music. When she was finished, she showered and went down to the kitchen, thinking she'd make herself a simple breakfast. What she saw when she got there surprised her, even though it probably shouldn't have. Anthony was sitting at the table, 2 full packs of bacon in front of him. I brought you a present. Bri put her hands on her hips and shook her head at him, laughing softly. You got yourself a present, hoping I'd make you breakfast again. He shrugged. That too. The front door chimed, and a voice called, Are you in the kitchen? Yeah. Bri called back. She turned to see who was there and smiled. Oh, hi, Mrs. Olson. How are you this morning? She'd always liked Jennifer's mom, despite the woman's only offspring. I'm good. I should have known you'd be cooking. Is this your new young man? Mrs. Olson smiled at Anthony. I've heard a lot about you this week. My Jennifer isn't used to men turning her down when she's interested. Anthony stood, not sure how to respond. Maybe things would be different if I'd seen her first, but I was half in love with Bri before I knew she existed. You've chosen a wonderful young lady, and I'm happy for you. She turned to Bri. I wanted to talk to you about the menu for Saturday night. Bri recoiled visibly. She hoped Jennifer hadn't sent her kind-hearted mother over to do her dirty work and ask her to change things now. The prep work was almost half done. Is there something wrong with it? Get that look off your face, Bri Roberts. You know I'm not going to make things harder for you if I can help it. Bri grinned. You're right. I do know that. I just wanted to see if you'd add some fruit and veggie trays. So many of my friends haven't given up on their New Year's resolutions yet. Between you and me, I know they will within another couple of weeks, but I want to pander to them for now. Mrs. Olson had always been slender as long as Bri could remember. Sure, we can do that. It would cost Jennifer dearly, but Bri would be happy to do it. It just meant spending all day on Saturday cutting up fruit and veggies, but for the extra money, it would be worth it. Do you want dips with them? Of course. I want my friends to enjoy the food at the party, and how could they enjoy it if they're only eating healthy things and not the fatty things they want? A couple of different dips would be wonderful. And you know I'll have to charge me more? Of course you will, dear. Bill it to Jennifer. She needs to make up for forgetting our anniversary somehow, doesn't she? Bri laughed. So you know that's why she's doing it? I'm sure I've told you before that I have no illusions about that daughter of mine. Mrs. Olson grinned at Anthony. I can see why she's after him, but don't back down. He looks like a good one. She rushed out the door as quickly as she'd come in, leaving Bri and Anthony staring at the spot where she'd been. Wow. I figured that Jennifer took after her mom. I guess not. Anthony shook his head. She seems to approve of us. Oh, everyone in town is rooting for us. Except Jennifer, of course, but I don't think she's really interested in you. She just doesn't want you to be interested in me. She's always been like that toward me. Is that why she's called me every single day since I met her? Inviting me to eat with her, shop with her, go for a drive, go skiing, go for a hike. I can't even remember everything she's asked me to do. Probably. It's just how she is. Don't worry about it. Bri turned from him toward the cabinet, a grin on her face. Jennifer was making a real play for Anthony, and he was still standing strong. As soon as you stop worrying about her, I will. He stood up and walked over to her, his hand starting at her shoulders and stroking down her arms. You haven't even kissed me good morning yet. She turned to face him, looping her arms around his neck. Well, since you told Mrs. Olson you were half in love with me before you met Jennifer, I guess you deserve some affection. I wouldn't otherwise, he asked, raising an eyebrow. You're in a feisty mood this morning. I had to run inside. I hate running inside. She tilted her head to one side. And I show you affection every single time I cook for you. I don't cook for just anyone, you know. Only the people I love. That's not true at all. You're cooking for Jennifer this weekend, and I don't see any love lost there. Yes, but do you have any idea what I'm charging her? You're getting my love-filled cooking for free. Asterisk. By Friday afternoon, the fixtures were installed in the bathrooms, the guest rooms were decorated, and Bri was in the kitchen with a knife, cutting up fruits and veggies for trays. The dips were made and in stacks in her refrigerator. Anthony came down to the kitchen after he'd finished for the day and stood watching her. You're not going to be able to do anything tonight, are you? She shook her head. No, not with the added fruit and veggie trays. I'll be doing good to find time to eat myself. Why don't I go pick up supper for us? She frowned at him. I'm supposed to cook for you. He shook his head. You cook for me twice a day, every day. Last weekend, you cooked for me 3 times a day. I think I can provide a meal or two. And then you'll come back and help me with cutting these fruits and veggies? There are a few I can't prepare until tomorrow, but most can be done tonight. She took another watermelon from the fridge and started the process of peeling it. She'd always found it easier to cut it into cubes after it was peeled. What do you want to eat? He asked. Surprise me. She really didn't want to have to take the time to think about it. Planning meals was something she did 7 days a week, and she'd made more than a dozen meals for him with no feedback. He could figure something out today. He nodded, wondering if he'd done something wrong. She wasn't usually so dismissive of him. All right. I'll be back soon. She kept working, barely realizing he'd left. She had to get this done, so she could get a good night's sleep and get up and start fresh in the morning. With the busy week they'd had at the Band B and this party all coming at her at once, she was more than a little overwhelmed. Usually she scheduled things better, but Anthony had her off her game. When he came back less than an hour later, she looked up from her 5th watermelon, startled he was back already. That was fast. You're completely losing track of time. I was stuck waiting in line forever. He took the knife from her hand. Wash your hands and come eat with me. You've barely taken 5 minutes off all day. She frowned at him. You were working. How do you know that? He shrugged. I just know. Please, take some time. Nodding, Bri walked to the sink and quickly washed her hands, drying them on a towel. What did you get? Italian. I got lasagna, meatballs, and chicken fettuccine alfredo. I figured we could each take some of everything and have a little feast. Oh, and I got garlic bread. She shook her head, grinning at him. We're going to be on carb overload. I'm going to have to add in another run, just to make up for tonight. I figure we'll work it all off at the party tomorrow. He caught her hand and pulled her to him, stroking his hands over her back. You still saving a dance for me? She smiled up at him. There's no one I'd rather dance with. Good answer. He leaned down and kissed her softly, his hand stroking her cheek. You're pretty special, you know that? Not really. She shook her head with a sigh. My best quality is my organization, and it's been shot to Hades this week. I don't think I've made this much of a mess of my schedule since my first semester of college. He frowned. Why do you say that? I schedule every minute of every day. I even schedule in my bathroom breaks. This week, well, I should have had a lot more done than I did. I should have stayed up later and prepped more for this party, but I was so tired after working all day and I wanted to spend time with you rather than cooking. You're throwing me off course. Is that a bad thing? She shrugged. I don't know. I don't like to be unpredictable. I ran my 8 miles in 59 minutes this morning, and my sister was sure I died. How long does it usually take you? He asked, his brows drawn together. He didn't quite understand what was going on in her head, but whatever it was, she seemed to think it was incredibly important. It always takes me 57 minutes. Exactly. Never a minute more or less. Today it was 2 minutes more. I don't think I dawdled or anything, but my time was longer. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I just feel like things are getting out of control, and I know that you probably think I'm crazy now, but I like to have all my ducks, not only in a row but quacking on command. He chuckled softly. No one can be perfect all the time. Perfect? I couldn't be further from perfect. At the moment, I'm a wreck. I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't get this done. I may have to call in my family members, and I don't want to have to do that. Would you do it for them? She shrugged. In a heartbeat. I bailed family out before, but no one should have to bail me out. I should be able to handle this. Then we'll handle it. Together. First, let's eat, and then we're going to finish everything we can do tonight. I don't care how long it takes. He gently pushed her toward the table. I'm getting plates and silverware. You just sit for a minute. He was surprised to see her so distraught over something so minor, but upon reflection, he understood. She really was strong for everyone else. She expected too much of herself. While they ate, Anthony steered the topic to things other than the band bee and the upcoming party. We had this dog when I was little. Her name was Kippa, and she was an absolute mess. My dad took me to the shelter when I was 6 and let me choose the dog I wanted. I saw this little black and white terrier mix and fell in love. She was jumping, not like a normal dog either. She was little, maybe 15 pounds, and she could jump higher than my head. I'd stand on tiptoes and try to hold stuff over my head, and she'd just jump up and take it. My grandmother called her the dog from hell. Bri laughed softly. Jack has a black lab named Tank. He is always in your face, trying to be your best friend. I swear if I added up the total amount of saliva that dog has licked on me, I could fill up a swimming pool. So are you a dog or cat person? I can't really have either, she said sadly. We always had dogs growing up, and I'd love to have another, but I just don't see how we could make it work. Not with the band bee and the guests. We don't know if people will be allergic or not, and the guests have to be our first priority. You should get a dog and let me visit him. Or we could get married and just pick out a dog together. I'll want to adopt though. I think there are too many dogs and cats already, and people should choose one from a shelter. Rescue dogs are always the best. Like your Kippa? She didn't respond to the marriage suggestion. She wanted to, but it wasn't time yet. She was too stressed and wanted someone to lean on. That wasn't a good enough reason to agree to marry someone. He nodded. I'd love another dog like Kippa. We couldn't have guests over, but she would smother us in love. What more can you ask for in a dog? Anthony smiled, realizing that she was much calmer now. There was still a lot of work to be done, but they could get it done together. When Becca came in 20 minutes later, they were still eating. I'm going to take a quick bath, and then I'm all yours for the night, she told Bri. I know we have a lot to get done before tomorrow. Have you hired enough people yet? Bri nodded. I have. Everyone will be there 30 minutes before the party for instructions. If we find someone we really like, we may want to hire them on after we open. Isn't it strange? We're about to start affecting the economy of Silver Springs by bringing in another business and more tourists. It's like we're responsible adults or something. Becca shook her head in mock horror. Just don't tell my parents. They'll expect so much more from me. Chapter 10. By the time they reached the hotel the next afternoon, Bri was calm again. She had everything under control. She wondered what Anthony thought of her after her little breakdown the day before, but he'd handled her perfectly. Her family knew she got that way, but most outsiders didn't. Maybe she wasn't thinking of him as an outsider anymore, and that was a bit scary. As the evening wore on, she watched him leave the kitchen with a full tray and return with an empty one over and over. She half expected him not to return each time, but he always did. How's it going out there? She asked halfway through the night. Which foods are people liking best? He shrugged. The fruits do well, but so do the sausage rolls. They love those little pinwheels. I think Mr. Olson is thrilled that you didn't serve any of the hoity-toity boring foods so many people think they need for a party like this. He took her hand. It's taking longer for the food to disappear now, so I think it's time we dance. She laughed. I don't know if that's a good idea. I mean, it sounded good when you first said it, but Jennifer would have a fit. So? What do you care what she thinks? What if she doesn't pay me? Bri asked. I met her mom. She's not going to let her get away with not paying just because you danced with me. The food has been wonderful, and you've earned your fee. He tugged her toward the door. We're dancing, and I don't care what anyone says. She grinned, following him out. Knowing her parents were at the party, along with both aunts and uncles, made it feel that much more daring. There was a slow song, just starting up, and she went into his arms. They'd never danced before, so she didn't know if he was a swayer or a real dancer, but whichever he was, she was sure to enjoy herself as long as he was the one holding her. It turned out he swayed to the music, having no real dancing skills, but she didn't care. This was a brilliant idea. Thank you for asking me to dance. The most beautiful woman in town shouldn't be in the kitchen all night, hidden away from everyone. Thank you for dancing with me. He pulled her a bit closer, resting his cheek on top of her head. He'd have to let her go right back to the kitchen after their song, and he wanted to hold her forever. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and saw Jennifer glaring at them. I think we got caught. In for a penny, in for a pound, right? Her brows drew together. What's that supposed to mean? He pulled her over to Jennifer, smiling at her as he kept his arm around Bri. Thanks for inviting us to the party. It's absolutely amazing. How did you put it together so quickly? Jennifer flipped her long hair, grinning at the compliment. Well, I did have some help. Bri here made some of the food. Bri opened her mouth to say she'd brought all the food, but she bit her lip. Anthony was obviously up to something, and she wasn't going to argue too much. The band is really good. Was it hard to find someone on such short notice? He asked. Jennifer shrugged. When you're willing to pay well for a service, it's not hard to get people to break other commitments. I see. Well, we're going to get back to work now. He tugged Bri back toward the kitchen, leaving her confused as to what had just happened. What was that about? I figured if we thanked her for inviting us, and told her how wonderful the party was, she'd realize that it was okay for us to dance, whether she liked it or not. Bri looked at him skeptically. We'll see. She'll probably go complain to my mother. She always was a tattletale. She really brings out the little girl in you, doesn't she? He asked. Sometimes. It seems to me that she spent her entire life doing everything she can to make my life miserable. That gets really old after a while. I'm sure it does. Maybe it's time you rise above it. Don't let her treat you that way. How am I supposed to stop her? He smiled as she played neatly into his plan. Take what she wants and do it in the most public way possible. What are you talking about? I want you to marry me. I've wanted that since the first day I met you. He pulled a ring from his pocket and showed it to her. Will you marry me, Brina? She slowly backed away, shaking her head. I can't marry a man just because he likes the fact that I feed him. No, you can't. Can you marry a man just because he loves you more than he ever imagined possible? Because he can't imagine life without you by his side? Because he believes that fate brought him to Silver Springs and your Bandby so he could find you and keep you forever? She swallowed hard. Is that why you're asking me to marry you? He nodded emphatically. That's exactly why I'm asking you to marry me. I love you, Bri Roberts, and you said I can't keep you in my pocket forever, so can I keep you by my side? With my ring on your finger? She bit her lip, not sure how to respond. She wanted to marry him so much, but where will we live? I have to be close to the Bandby, and you can't live there, because you'd have to share a bathroom with Becca, and that would be just awkward, Anne. He cut her off with a quick kiss. Is that a yes? She nodded hesitantly, before throwing her arms around him. That's definitely a yes. I don't know how we're going to make it work, but that's a yes. She rested her head against his shoulder for a moment. I love you, you know. He scooped her off her feet and spun her in a circle. I'm keeping you. He slid the diamond ring Becca had helped him pick out onto her finger. She laughed. And I'm keeping you. So glad I won't have to pay for repairs on the Bandby. You're a brat. The door to the kitchen opened, and Becca stuck her head inside. Can we come back in now? All our trays are empty. Bri swatted Anthony's arm. Did you tell them to keep out? Well, yeah. I'm not stupid enough to think a man should propose with the whole world watching. He looked over his shoulder to Becca. Come on back in. All of the servers hurried in, grabbing their next trays, which Bri had already arranged, rushing back out to feed the hungry masses. Come with me. He pulled her back toward the door. You know, I really do need to work. I know. We'll work right after we tell your parents. She dug her heels in, not willing to leave the kitchen. Tonight? We can't interrupt the party. Are you following me, or am I carrying you out there over my shoulder? Your mom has called me 4 times this week to see if I proposed yet. I want to tell her now. You can't give in to my mother's demands. She'll start to expect it. He gave her the sternest look she'd ever seen on his face. She's adopted me. I have to keep her happy now. He turned and pulled her toward the door. We're telling them immediately. He didn't stop walking until he was in front of her parents, who had formed a small circle with her aunts and uncles. Brina wants to tell you something. He keeps calling me Brina instead of Bri, she said when all of the elder Roberts' eyes were on her. Mom grinned. You came out here just to tell us that? I think we figured out his propensity for using his own nickname days ago. Bri looked at him over her shoulder, biting her lip. She wasn't sure how to say it. Anthony sighed and took her left hand, showing her mother the ring he'd just put on it. She seems to have lost her voice, but this should tell you what you need to know. Mom squealed, hugging Bri close. To his surprise, she grabbed him in a hug next, whispering in his ear. I knew you were the right man for her. Be good to my baby. Then Bri was hugged by everyone else. First Dad, and then Uncle Bob and Aunt Christina. Then Uncle Steve and Aunt Patricia, and then she ended up being hugged by Mom again. She finally stopped them with a laugh. I have to go back to the kitchen and finish up. Aunt Christina grinned, shaking her head. I never thought you'd be the first of the cousins to marry. You're the youngest. I didn't think I would either. Bri waved and hurried back toward the kitchen, just then realizing that Jennifer was standing close by, gawking at her. Excuse me. Did you really just get engaged? Jennifer asked. Moving fast so you don't have to worry about me taking him from you, I see. Bri smiled sweetly. She wasn't going to let Jennifer ruin this moment for her. You've made a bigger play for him than you have for any other guy I've dated. I think you need to give up on this one. Jennifer folded her arms over her chest. Don't you think you should be doing the job I'm paying you to do instead of running around with him? Bri took a step closer to Jennifer, poking her in the middle of her chest. I've worked my butt off for this party. I made everything you wanted, and then I added in even more when your mother asked. You have no right to criticize a thing I've done here. I won't stand here and listen. You can't talk to me that way. I just did. Bri walked around Jennifer back toward the kitchen, a smile teasing her face. She'd put up with Jennifer treating her like garbage for altogether too long. She may not be a pretty, flighty blonde, but she was a strong, competent woman. She wasn't going to allow herself to be victimized for another minute. Asterisk. After the mess from the party was cleaned up, and each of the servers had received their wages, Bri, Anthony, and Becca loaded up the empty trays to take back home. Becca rode back home with Bri, while Anthony followed in his truck. You knew he was going to propose tonight, didn't you? Becca laughed. Who do you think helped him pick out the ring? It's beautiful. I couldn't imagine he knew my taste so well already. Of course he didn't, but I do. I'm so happy for you, I just can't stand it. Do you have any idea how hard it was for me to keep my big mouth shut and not shout it from the rooftops? Bri laughed. I can imagine. You didn't even tell your mom, did you? Becca shook her head emphatically. I couldn't. 'Cause she'd tell your mom, and then she'd tell Emma, and Emma would tell you. I had to keep my lips zipped, and it felt like I was going to burst, and then there would be little teeny tiny pieces of Becca everywhere. You did good. That's why you're my favorite cousin, Bri said with a grin. I'm really proud of how you handled Jennifer tonight. I know how hard that must have been for you. You've let her have way too much power over you for too long. Good job. Thank you. It wasn't easy, but I wasn't about to let her ruin this night for me. I'm getting married, Becca. You are. We'll figure out the living situation later. For now, you just enjoy being engaged to the man you love. Bri smiled. I have a feeling he's not going to want a long engagement. No, he's not. Every time he looks at you, it's obvious that he's not going to wait long. Do you think we could have the wedding outside at the Bandby? We'd talked about having a wedding arch built, and now we have a free handyman. Free? I didn't think about that. We'll have to pay him for the bathroom, of course, but after that. Do we still have to pay for the sidewalk? Bri laughed. We're not even married yet. It's not time for you to think of ways to take advantage of him. Becca sighed. You're absolutely right. I'll wait until you're on your honeymoon. She was silent for a moment. But wait, a honeymoon? You can't leave me alone at the Bandby right after we open it. How am I going to manage without you? I can't cook. You can. You just don't like to. We'll get Mom to help. She loves to feed people. Bri parked her vehicle and looked over at Becca. Thanks for being my best friend and my best cousin. Want to be a bridesmaid? I think you and Emma need to be beside me. Absolutely. Becca slid out of the car. I think your man would like a little of your time. I'm going to my room. With that, she slid out of the car and hurried into the house. Anthony opened her door. All right if I come in for a bit? I know it's after midnight, and we're both going to turn into pumpkins soon, but I need to sit with you for a little while and let it sink in that you actually said yes. I didn't think it was possible. You've been telling me that we're getting married for almost 2 weeks now. How could you not think it was possible? He took her hand and walked toward the front door with her. I don't know. I guess I wasn't sure I'd ever convince you that I loved you for more than your cooking. She laughed. And I love you for more than your skills with your hands. Glad to hear it. He led her to the parlor, sinking onto the couch there and pulling her down onto his lap, his arms around her. Now that we're engaged, want to make out? She laughed. You're crazy. How would you feel about a 3-year engagement? 3 days. He knew she wanted to negotiate, or she'd never have started so high. 1 year. 3 weeks. 3 months? She asked. Mid-May or early June? When the flowers are in bloom and Colorado is at its best? He nodded. Sounds perfect. Mid-May. He kissed her softly. Now for what I'm really after. He pulled her head down to his and kissed her. She sighed contentedly. Life had never seemed so exciting.